Hey guys, welcome to the All Blue. I am iKailaKai, joined today with Hrvoje and Yonas as usual. Today is a bit of a big episode, so let's kind of just jump straight into it. Sorry, we may have jumped into this a little bit too quickly. Just so you know, the All Blue is now on Spotify. We shadow dropped it last episode, but many people didn't notice. You can find that in the description below. Make sure to check us out on Spotify. Follow because you'll get the notification instantly. But of course, if you want to see our faces as well as some of the graphics on the screen, YouTube's going to be the place for that. Thank you for your support as always. Enjoy the video. Finally, after quite a while of Bandai teasing us, we have the ban list. And I think that it's the best time to talk about how these bans are, for the most part, going to affect OP12, maybe a little bit OP13, but that's going to be highly speculative. I'm going to be very curious what two extremely high-level players from around the world think about these. How are you guys doing today?
I'm doing good today. It's a bit early for me, but I've been barely able to sleep given how excited I've been about the bands. So I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, for me, it's a very nice, relaxed day. We're filming this out of the ordinary schedule. It's midday for me, so very well rested and ready to dive in.
Yeah, a little bit of behind the curtains. Usually it's my morning, but today it is very, very morning for Jonas. So if he is a bit out of it, then you'll know why. So let's just jump straight into so far what has been banned, and then we'll talk one by one. I'll also give the reasoning that Bandai gave for each one of these cards, whether it's unbans or bans. The first card that was banned is actually a new thing that they've done for at least the One Piece card game. A restriction of choice for Blue Purple Luffy. Blue Purple Luffy is no longer allowed to run the OP11 number 67 Katakuri and the OP08 number 69 Charlotte Ning Ning, also known as Nine Mom. I think this kind of kills the deck. What do you think, Jonas?
I think if they banned Nine Mom from Blue Purple Luffy, or if they banned ACOS Katakuri from Blue Purple Luffy, I think the deck potentially had a little bit more survivability and had a chance to continue to be pretty strong in the upcoming metagame. But since it has neither card, I think it's like pretty close to being impossible to live. This choice restrict makes it weird to the point that I'm not entirely sure if blue purple is even the best like controlling purple Luffy deck moving forward, whether like purple Luffy or like red purple Luffy might have a chance, which is something interesting to talk about. But it's a very interesting way to not remove the cards from the meta, but also make sure that blue purple isn't as dominant.
Yeah, I feel like mainly with the Linley removal, it just lost its main tool against aggro decks, and like both the small body aggro like Belvetti, Rayleigh, Zoro, and whatnot, but also against like medium-sized body aggro, which is green purple, and now the green Zoro. So I can see the deck still seeing some play, but in a similar way to how red purple Luffy does, where it just tries to ramp up into these big bodies and aggro the opponent down with the size of big units, which usually doesn't work. Like against most meta decks, it's a predictable plan. It kind of easily falls apart, especially when the deck gets pressured. So it does still have giant, but it now probably has to go like the Don Quixote family route because it's like the only real engine it can run with a bunch of events nowadays. So I can see it having play, people still like running it, but I'm not expecting it to be like top of the meta.
Yeah, I was theorizing. I think that many people were speculating that Nine Mom was going to be the pick from Bandai, so I was also testing a little bit of how Blue Purple Luffy would do, at least in OP13, without Nine Mom. And my conclusion was that he'd probably kind of be okay, just because I think that the main issues so far that I've seen in OP13 are or mostly Ima. And against Ima, Nine Mom doesn't really do too much aside from heal you one. 8 Katakuri was the big value card. I was thinking that even if we were to lose Nine Mom, maybe he'd be knocked down like 2 tiers or something. Maybe playable. Losing both these cards, as Hrvoje said, you do probably need to focus on that Don Quixote Pirates package. Potentially in OP13, you could go for Roger Pirates, though, but that's a whole other thing to consider. Because I said that I was going to do this and I already forgot to. This is the reasoning for why Bandai decided to ban the card. Essentially, to summarize what they said, they made Blue Purple Luffy with the intention of having him have a very weak early game and a very strong late game, but due to the fact that he could play these threats like 8 Katakuri and 9 Cuss Bombs so early thanks to his ramp, and they have so much influence on the board from such an early stage in the game, it made it so that the weaknesses in Blue Purple Luffy were kind of mended much too early on in the game, so therefore they decided to get rid of both of these options, making Blue Purple Luffy's weaknesses a lot more clear and his strengths Honestly, maybe a little bit unclear as well.
Yeah, I don't think it's like I think the late game potential, even despite the power of Giant, it just isn't up there compared to most of the other decks in the format. I hope there will be other cards to make the deck a little bit more playable, a little more resilient moving forward. But as it is right now, it's going to be like an anti-control deck at the best moving forward.
Even in that regard, it is still a little bit iffy, I would say, just because I think to be able to contend with other control decks, you need to actually survive into the late game. And him losing both of his survival tools, Gum Giant's really not enough to make this deck really tick. So I feel like you'd probably be forced to, at the very least right now, play around 8 cost of Flamingo, play around 9 cost Luffy, and kind of play a sort of weird tempo-y, mid-rangey type of deck that plays towards the late game. A bit tricky to kind of put together a deck list right now, but Blue Purple Luffy as a leader is not banned though, which is something.
It's an interesting like approach. I didn't expect pair bans. I know they did it in Digimon, but usually it's a thing I associate with like digital TCGs or like just digital card games, I guess, because it's more easier to execute and control in a digital environment where it's like automatic whether a card can be combined with some other cards. But I guess it does make some sense to do it with like leader plus card pairs, just because it's something easily monitored. Like your leader is always there, present on the table, so you should know that some card should not be in your deck just off of the list. So I think from execution standpoint, it won't be like too demanding in terms of like event logistics, like for deck checks and something like that for judges or deck list control. So I kind of like the approach on that front, and I'm also maybe surprised that they haven't tried it earlier in the game as well. I guess in this instance they didn't want to have a Luffy leader band or one of the new super rares or relatively new super rares in Katakuri.
Yeah, I completely would understand them not wanting to get rid of Katakuri, especially because it's so core to especially the purple Katakuri deck, and I think that they don't necessarily want to accidentally kill another deck at the same time, like they kind of did when they killed Forecast Jinbe and subsequently also killed the leader Hancock. But Nine Mom, I don't necessarily think was a card that was played in purple Katakuri. The purple-yellow pudding also tended to run the 10 costs rather than the 9 costs. So I am a bit surprised that they ended up leaving the 9 cost mom, but I'm not against the idea of Bandai choice restricting in the game just because, at least from my standpoint, it's not that difficult to remember and not that difficult to build around going into the future.
Choice restrictions are something that I am very new to. I've never really dealt with them. I don't really see any major downsides, but I've heard a lot of people talk about how it's relatively cumbersome for new players to get a feel for. It's kind of weird to explain, like, oh, Nine Mom and Katakuri technically aren't banned from the game, but you just can't play them in this deck. So it might be a little bit adding a little bit layer of complexity to a lot of players trying to get into the game. But I don't think that's that meaningful with the leader plus character combination ban that Hrvoje was talking about, where it's like relatively easy to execute on. I'm I'm worried about more complex combinations moving forward, but this is a kind of a refreshing way to make sure we get to play with a bunch of new cards while making sure that the busted combinations aren't going to ruin formats.
One of the main things that's kind of come up as a discussion point now that Blue Purple Luffy is, at least for the foreseeable future, in a very difficult spot in the meta. Potentially someone can find something that works. People have been trying to find what is the new control deck to take over the meta. Blue Purple Luffy has notoriously kind of overshadowed all of the other control decks in the meta, so now people are talking about things like NL, Bonney, Shanks, Black Lucci, these sorts of decks kind of coming back into the meta. How do you feel like these decks maybe sort of interact, or do you actually think that one of these decks really has a chance of coming back into the meta?
Well, I think in terms of pure control, I'm never like a fan of those types of decks because usually they leave a lot of options for the other player. Like all the agency is on the side of the player playing the proactive deck, and you need to get kind of lucky with the tools you draw as the control deck, because these decks don't usually run a lot of searchers for their best cards either. They're like piles of the good cards for that color. So I don't necessarily see them as dominant, but I do see them as threats. For example, Bonney and NL. I think NL especially with the new Kuma, he can just go for like a full control build and catch people off guard if you're not like playing carefully for the entire game. I'm sure Yonas will have more to say on the topic of NL. But for Bonney, like she did get like also access to one of the best cards in the set, which is 8-cost Mihawk, maybe even the best card in the set. Like I really think it's absurd 4-cost 8K blocker. Oh yeah, but I want to say the decks that combine like control and aggression elements are always the ones that I have more of an eye out for. So for example, direct comparison to NL in my mind is the Yellow Kid, and that's the deck I would sooner play than NL, just because he seems to be equally well positioned to aggro, has the same healing tools, same like half control tools, but he can also put up the aggression and proactively starve the opponent's resources rather than having to like wait for the opponent to play something and then remove it and so on.
For me, the main thing I've noticed, at least my first inclinations when going into this upcoming meta, is when blue purple isn't going to be this monolith that we have to deal with anymore. The main like power vacuum that exists is just like how strong Green Zoro and Rayleigh seem to be in this upcoming meta. And in my head, the two cards that I want to be playing in those kind of metas is 3-cost Blackbrook and then the new 6-cost Kuma. Like in any combination, and I think black and yellow have a lot more like power moving forward to make sure that they have like a lot of like more mid-rangey options to be good against like the Zoro and the Red Rayleigh. I'm super excited for Anel, but I do think that it's like if you get only paired against Rayleigh and Green Zoro, I think Anel's probably at its best, but it loses a lot of equity against a lot of the other decks. Just because its like removal options isn't going to be specifically amazing, but its survivability is obviously absurd. But yeah, like Hrvoje mentioned, decks like Yellow Kid have a lot more balance of a matchup spread and a lot more proactive, which is generally a good thing in card games. Just because one thing we've noticed a lot when we played like GP versus UP, for example, is despite the fact that a deck can have such inevitable, powerful late game tools, if you don't put your opponent on some sort of clock, you give them a huge amount of options just to kind of make sure they control the pace of the game, make things very awkward. And without like absurd amounts of power that Anel doesn't really have, your opponents can very likely to just steamroll you.
Yeah. NL seems to be one of those decks that at the time that he somehow qualified for Worlds way back when in 2023 was in a way just waiting for the opponent to run out of cards. And in the OP12, OP13 metagame that we live in, where there's cards are much more accessible, cards are just a lot stronger, it seems harder to really get to that point where eventually you just win out the game by slowly choking out your opponent. So I do agree that Yellow Kid does seem to be the easiest direct comparison and a bit more flexible in terms of the way that you can play out the game, maybe a bit more modernized. One other deck that I was thinking about that could potentially be good in this upcoming meta that kind of fits into that sort of yellow control category is Blue Yellow Nami, because her Raigo is not banned and it's Red Rock.
I'm super excited about. I'm super excited about Blue Yellow Nami too. It's more of a cope deck in my
we haven't
opinion.
had the starter deck yet, yeah.
Yeah, I need to double check the release date for the starter deck, but the Summon Cost Odin really. You say September 5th? Okay, so I'll have it for Nationals, thankfully. And I do think that the new Odin is a really powerful tool for that deck. I think the combination of blue and yellow in general just like really struggled against blue purple, just because the threats were relatively slow compared to what like Sanji 9-Mom could ever do. But the Odin definitely puts a lot of it makes it really easy to apply a lot of pressure to decks really quickly. And as we know about Nami, that deck's really hard to kill when you're a 7K leader, when your opponent doesn't have two 9K bodies in play. So I'm super excited for the deck. I think it might be a decent contender, but I don't think that the Zoro matchup's naturally going to be super favored. So there might need to be a little bit more extra concessions to make sure that matchup's a little bit better.
Yeah, for sure. But I guess having access to those yellow control tools, even some older cards like Nari Kabura Arrow that can minus 3,000 power the opponent's leader or character for the entire turn, may be able to help in that matchup and are by no means bad in other matchups as well. So maybe something to consider there. The point that you brought up about 7-cost Olden, I do kind of want to ask a little about, because I think at least in Japan during OP12, SC22, the Ace and Newgate start deck where the Olden is housed nicely in, that Olden came into a lot of blue decks and was the sort of answer that blue had, or mono blue at least, had to blue purple Luffy. And I was curious, there's also decks like Blue Kuzan that are coming out in OP12 that also, at least in Japan, like to run this Olden because it helped you in the Blue Purple Leaf matchup. I wonder if there are these sorts of decks that can afford to not have to run any more blue purple Luffy counter cards and are therefore stronger without the cards.
Trying to figure out a good answer
And
to this
green
question.
purple benefits a lot from potentially not having to run multiple copies of Luffy Taro. So that's one close to heart for me. But I also think like Deadman's Game is not the best of cards. Like it's really good to close out games against blue purple Luffy specifically, and it can be good into other decks. But it did not feel like exceptional into pretty much anything besides blue purple Luffy. So that potentially frees up spots for tech for specifically Zoro and probably Rayleigh, because that's the hardest matchup. But I guess the fact there's no blue purple Luffy also kind of makes the Hody decks less reliant on Hody to perform in the meta. So they could maybe free up some spots like Smoker and Green Yellow, and I guess Bonney will still run Hody because she uses it as a control tool and not as an aggro tool. Yeah, I'm not sure. Maybe even black decks can drop Tenko Skuzan because that was the main card they relied on against the blue purple. A lot of maybes.
Yeah, no, there are a lot of maybes, but I do think that those sorts of things are very exciting to think about because I'm always looking for cards to cut from my deck, and Hody is one of those cards that I always want to cut, but especially in this meta with blue purple Luffy, you just were not allowed to.
I'm glad to see him be less playable moving forward, or at least people cutting a little bit more because I'm scared of losing to that card. One thing that I wanted to talk about, it's kind of related, about cards that you don't have to play, but kind of reverse, but cards that I think are a lot better without blue purple being this super powerful deck in the format, is just like character removal for like mid-range bodies. I don't think many decks really played many cards like to prioritize killing like 4s, 5s, and 6s moving forward, or like the past couple sets. Just because I think decks that were really good at clearing like mid-range bodies, like black decks and yellow decks, just were dysfunctional. And even Shanks in a similar way, were just dysfunctional against these like 2 9K body a turn kind of decks like blue purple Luffy. I think a lot of people will be leaning more towards like killing 6K, 7K, 8K bodies, like 5, 6, 7 cost bodies a lot more frequently. And I think that is going to be something that's going to drive a lot more of deck building. Sadly, one of my favorite decks, Purple Black Luffy, becomes a lot more unplayable, sadly, upon the ban of Blue Purple Luffy, just because it gained a lot of equity in the fact that, one, it had a decent Blue Purple Luffy matchup, but also because a lot of people weren't playing a lot of removal for like 7K bodies, especially like 7 cost 7K bodies. And I expect because of like Rayleigh's increased like presence in the format, cards like Mole Pistol and other similar stuff like that is going to be a lot more prevalent.
One of the cards that instantly came to mind when you're talking about that was Jilza, the 6-cost Jilza. That card, I think, is potentially one of the best 6 costs in the game, at least as of OP12. And obviously, just a 6 cost being able to bounce back a 6 cost, it's hard to argue that there's a 6 cost that's better than that because it directly counters all of them. But Jilza, a card that could be run in Blue Purple Luffy, was never run because it just completely was useless against Blue Purple Luffy. But I think that just any blue deck in general that can use this card well, potentially Blue Yellow Nami, but we'll kind of have to see how much she needs it because she does also have things like Nojigo, which can just bounce a 5 cost. But Blue Kuzang, any Whitebeard Pirates blue deck, because that's the typing of the card. And of course, one that we're going to talk about very soon, Sakazuki could potentially use these cards very well. So I think that it is very exciting to just see the extra space that's been given and what people are going to do with that space.
I mean, those like symmetrical effects are never really symmetrical in card games. That's what you quickly learn. So yeah, you bounce one of your own, but it's going to be a value piece anyways. Something that's maybe even better in your hand than on the board. In Sakazuki, it would be like Tsuru, or just in any other deck, a Searcher. And you're getting rid of a 6 cost while establishing a 6 cost of your own. Or like, you're not getting rid of it, you're delaying it and buying time, and sometimes that's all you need. Just a bit more time to kill the opponent.
Blue Purple Luffy, the arbiter of time, but
yeah,
no more.
I think the biggest piece of foreshadowing is what Yonas mentioned, though. I think in Rayleigh Smoker, like every deck with just even the tiniest splash of red, we're going to be seeing a lot of Mulgans, because that card is just so absurdly above rate. So might be a Mulgan format.
I think we haven't talked too much about Green Bonney, but Green Bonney, a deck that did struggle against Blue Purple Luffy, potentially maybe coming back due to Blue Purple Luffy now not existing, but just red in general, even red aggro decks, red control decks are using this card as well. So any sort of power reduction can sort of weaken the idea of Bonney with 8-cost Kid. But I guess, oh yeah, you guys are getting OP12 for the first time. It felt like so long for me. The 8-cost Mihawk is a different way that you can build that deck too. So maybe you just take that sort of deck in a completely new direction.
Yeah, I think Bonney's like biggest enemy is like he flies the same banner. Like when you play Bonney against Zoro, it does not feel very pleasant for the Bonney side. It's like they made Zoro leader to whoop a Bonney because he establishes bodies faster. His leader ability bypasses the Bonney leader ability. I don't know. It's rough for Bonney out there, I think. And of course, if Black actually mounts a comeback because Blue Purple Luffy is gone, there is also like another enemy for Bonney that she struggles with.
Maybe we don't want to teeter on this subject too much, but one thing that I do find a little bit interesting, because way back when in our previous ban list, which was in a way kind of episode 0 of the All Blue before we sort of established this as a whole thing, we had Moria banned a couple of months ago at this point, maybe about half a year ago now. And before Moria was banned, Black control generally just obliterated decks red control, but then after they lost Moria, red control had a significantly better time into black control because it was much easier to get rid of things like the Tenkas Kazang, which generally seems to be the way that black control likes to build their deck recently. So it is one of those things where we also have to kind of look back at not how the meta was before we had Blue Purple Luffy as a threat, but considering that we have had several bans in the last couple of months that we do need to take into account.
I'm not sure, like in OP10, in the Western OP10, the Uchi against Shanks matchup still felt like favor to the Uchi side just because of the absurd power of setting up repeating removal. Because the only red deck that can like set up an engine that removes something every turn is Marco, which has seen more popularity recently, but also relied on like aggressive pieces of the animal engine. But specifically like Uchi against Shanks, it always felt like if Shanks keeps a step, Uchi is just running away with the game, but also kind of the other way around. If Uchi missed too many of his early pieces, Shanks would run him over because he would establish those big bodies. But it always felt more comfortable for me to play the Uchi side in OP10 at least. So I don't imagine it changing that much, but I could be wrong, at least for Uchi specifically.
I was kind of just looking at the matchup in a vacuum with the 10 cost KO Shanks being able to answer the 10 cost Kazang. And that's kind of the sentiment that I've heard in Japan, but I trust the Western meta much more than Japanese meta.
I think they had that format running for a while longer than they did.
I think it's more of a forecast Kuzan. Like that card is just like a very difficult card for Shanks to deal with, specifically on curve until you get to like the Ben Beckman stuff. If Luchi is able to establish that card and Shanks starts playing catch up, it just feels like a really hard thing to keep up with every turn. Luchi doesn't need to do anything super spectacular as long as he just keeps like KOing their guy and keep playing a Kuzan, and it just feels like you're in this kind of hellhole where you can't get out.
Yeah, Uta, Bun, Kuzan, all like the setup pieces.
I was also thinking that, for example, the argument of Ben Beckman and Forecast Kazang, I don't necessarily think that Shanks needs to play the game out too aggressively in the early game as well. He could just wait until the Ben Beckman comes down. But it does seem like they're both responding to each other, and Lucci's responses are generally more flexible. So I would probably have to agree with you on that point then. But my Shanks cope is already dead.
I wouldn't say it's dead. I still think it might see like actual play now in Western OP12. But I'm also thinking there's going to be better options.
I'm a Shanks fan. I mean, I think the deck is very uninteresting to execute on, but I do think like the survivability of that deck is probably something that shouldn't be underestimated. Like I'm concerned that it's like Shanks matchup. Oh, sorry, its Rayleigh matchup was going to be quite solid, and I think Bonney's also going to be a decent contender, and that matchup's also pretty solid. So that's the main reason why I think it's going to be pretty interesting, just as Shanks players moving forward kind of have a little bit more good matchups in general.
Yeah, I mean, with the new OP12 Shanks as well as PRB02 around the corner for you guys, having a couple of cards that can potentially slot into the deck, even the Forecast Kobe we saw in the most recent Japan finals, or yeah, Wave 1 Japan finals, could make the deck a lot stronger. And I know there are a lot of Shanks fans, especially overseas. It is also just a very popular deck with newer players being quite simple to execute on and still very clearly powerful in what it does. So I'm sure, regardless of power, it is a deck that we may end up seeing. Shall we jump into the next card, or are there things that we want to talk about in regards to a world without Blue Purple Luffy?
I think the one of the other cards that are on the ban list is a little more interesting to talk about.
But also like more context with more bans.
Let's move on then. The second and only other card that's being banned from the game is the OP03 number 40 Nami. This Nami card, yeah, according to Bonney, was at least the milling strategy was far more powerful than they expected it to be. Especially, this is not in the actual write-up that they gave for the explanation, but I remember in interview back, I think around the first Worlds that you both were attending in, they were talking about how they didn't expect people to run things like Impel Down All-Stars purely for the trigger in the deck, and that really took them by surprise. But it made perfect sense because you just trash it with things like Giant Gavel. But this strategy proved problematic for them, which is why they had to ban Cabaji back in the day. And now it's proving to be a problem for them because it's limiting their design space in that they can't make very good blue drawing cards. So they decided to just get rid of Nami as a whole, and instead they have printed a new Nami, which is promo card number 117, which is importantly block 4, which is something we could talk about, and it has the exact same effect as the old Nami, except it now has one extra stipulation, and that's that you can only put East Blue type cards into your deck.
Life is good. Life is good.
Yeah. I feel bad for the people in North America that have been only playing Nami since inception, but I'm also pretty happy for the deck to be gone. I'm glad my donation in the last stream ended up manifesting it in real life too. So it's a win-win. One thing for me with the Nami deck, especially with the fact that it got reprinted, or there's a new promo that got printed, I do like the fact there's an alternative win con in the game, and that's like always super interesting just for like people that love to deck build. I also am glad there's an extra deck building restriction just because I think that it makes it a lot easier from the designer's perspective to make sure that, hey, I'm not accidentally printing a card like Otama that might break the Nami deck kind of thing. I feel like it kind of limited a lot of deck building ingenuity for the Nami deck. It kind of feels like moving forward, you just can't put any deck that isn't East Blue, and it seems like from the design perspective, there's going to be very cognizant of the fact whenever they're printing a blue East Blue card. So there's basically going to be no changes to the Nami deck set by set moving forward, which I think is fine, but I also think it's a relatively tad boring. So hopefully they end up doing a little bit things in terms of variety of deck building options moving forward with Nami, but I'm kind of sad that people can't really deck build with the deck anymore and kind of find new cards to mess around with.
So for me, the weird thing is like they reprinted with like the block 4 icon, but almost all of our support that came out with the original leader in OP3 is gonna rotate out immediately. Well, when the Nami would have rotated out herself, and also the way they made the promo, it effectively, because I saw this argument brought up, like why didn't they just do pair bans with the Nami leader? And I think there's a few reasons for that, but effectively the new promo is a pair ban for Nami leader with anything that's not East Blue. Like that's like how they decided to execute it in practice, which for the time being is somewhat playable still, but obviously not going to be a meta contender anytime soon. But I also think, as I said, like it restricts future design. This is something we talked about. I'm not sure if in previous podcasts, but at least among us, which leaders like present those design borders that like cannot be crossed. Like every time there's a good heal card NL in yellow, NL is like, ooh, maybe this is for me. And I think similarly for like good generic removal or cost reduction in black, like Wuchi Teach can pounce on it. Bonney is like the representative for like generically good green leader, and I guess Shanks for the red one, but also Zoro on the other aggro. And there's always this leader which like if a good generic card comes out for this purpose specifically, they just run away with it. And the Nami was definitely that for blue. Any card draw effect, it just risks bringing her over the edge. And when top players play Nami and they like play near perfect, memorize the entire stack, and know exactly how they're supposed to resolve each effect, it just feels like terrible. Like it's a very, very skilled thing to do, one of the hardest decks in the game for sure. But it's also to play against one of the most hopeless things, because if someone is really, really good at Nami, all those matchups usually consider favored. Some don't feel favored. They feel like even or maybe even slightly losing. And unless you like have a deck that completely hard counters Nami, like I guess at time of OP8, OP9 it would be like Vegapunk, and before that way Red Purple Wall. You just lose a match that you don't feel like you should have lost. But these, like when the player is really good, they just draw out the very maximum. So there would be just a ton of cards that they would have to pair ban. I think even in OP14, because it's supposed to be some Warlord set, and we already are seeing some inklings of like Boa support. So I'm imagining she's going to get a lot of draw support in blue as well. because going way back to OP1, the first Boa cards were all like related to card draw. Like the OP1 Boa, the Lava of Mellow, I think she'll have some theme of heavy card draw, which is why they didn't want to do pair bans with like the Otama and the Marco that are coming out, because they would just have to repeat it all again for OP14.
It seems like they have been trying to deal with Nami in the past. They have printed cards that were like draw 2, put 2 to the bottom of your deck, so you don't actually make your deck size smaller. They had some cards that were like, oh, like if
Looking
your
at the
leader's
multicolor or
multicolored.
specifically,
Yeah,
there's like the VV. But yeah,
Yeah.
the fact that that 3 cost 5k Kuzan drew 2 and put 2 to the bottom, it always made me sad because I want to run him in Sakazuki so bad, but you didn't really gain value out of bottoming stuff from hand.
Mm.
And he was such a good stat line too, like 3-5.
Oh, yeah, that's so true, actually. Yeah, it's one of those things where if Nami just was a little bit weaker or just didn't exist for that period of time, then we maybe would have had a much different world. But I mean, I guess we shouldn't complain too much because I think that Nami is a deck that's perfect when the perfect Nami player pilots it, they barely win by like 1 to 2 cards. It's not a deck that should ever be strong because it's terrible to play. I think the mirror is also terrible to play. Play against, I should say. So I think it's a bit of a shame that they decided to ban the leader just 6 months before it would have rotated out naturally. But this is the direction they decided to go with. I think they just really wanted to make sure that Ace had these cards and that those cards were not locked to Ace and were generically usable for some other leaders. But a nice decision at the end of the day. I don't necessarily disagree with their reasoning. I just wish that the timing or potentially way that they went about it was a bit different.
There's also probably implications for like the Eternal format because they're saying it's going to run alongside rotation. So if they don't ban the Nami leader, then nothing rotates out and she can maybe be a complete menace over there as well.
That'd be terrifying.
Yeah, no, I feel like no one would play Eternal. That would sound terrible. Speaking of formats where things are unbanned, we do have a couple of cards that have been unbanned. We'll first talk about the one that's a little bit maybe less interesting because I think this will be a very quick discussion. The very first card that was ever banned in this game alongside Moby Dick, Cabaji, is now coming off the ban list. This card was banned because it made the mill version of Nami very strong back in OP03, which they wanted to prevent, so they got rid of this card. On its own, it's a 2 cost 3000 that on play, if you have a Molgi in play, draws 2 and trashes 1. Could this maybe be usable in Buggy, or is this basically just a dead card?
The fact that they're not searchable is what holds them down. And also there's like no neat way to reuse them in Buggy because he doesn't run like Jozu or any other bounce tools.
True.
Could run like maybe Overheat or something.
Overheat or like Slave Arrow, but
Yeah, I think. Oh yeah, Slave Arrow, but oh yeah, actually yeah, this is a 2 cost, so it works.
It would work there, but it is a bit of an awkward card at the end of the day. So yeah, not just one of those cards that they decided didn't need to be banned anymore now that they've gotten rid of the root of the problem. Anyways,
yeah, sensible.
Sakazuki's been unbanned.
Good.
You can take it away, Hrvoje.
So yeah, as soon as the ban list, it was like noon in Croatia, and I immediately sent a message to group chat like, does anyone want to test OP12 into Sakazuki? And I gathered like all the cards I can think of that could matter for Sakazuki, both the ones that I ran previously and the new ones, and went to the local store and tested for like 5 hours. And I tested into Rayleigh, into Green Zoro, and into Bonney, and the deck felt a lot better than I anticipated. Like Rayleigh, if they high roll, the games felt close, but they could be like crushed by a single Tempest Kick or Houndblade's trigger, just slowing down Rayleigh enough. Bonney like felt like complete stomp, and I think the biggest problem is what people generally expected from the deck to struggle with is the Green Zoro, where even though I immediately put like 2 black vortices in the deck, which is like the classic black answer to Green Zoro and OP12, the game still felt like quite struggling because Zoro still has access to all those green tools that cheat Dawn, and they allow you to play like high cost units at a lower cost. So you effectively paid 4 Dawn for the Mihawk, but he's an 8 cost, and that's quite out of reach. And similarly, Cavendish is like a 5 cost you play for 3 Dawn, and Tashigi is because she lets you swing like a 2 cost, 5 cost effectively. And as long as they have gas to keep presenting bodies on board, you can fumble and you can lose because you're not able to rely on your blockers to like get you to safety like you would against some other aggressive decks such as Yamato or any of the purple like aggro decks we have had recently. So I think the deck will be good. It will take time to cook up the right list and find the right answers to Green Zoro especially. I'm not sure if it'll be tier 1, but I expect it to be a contender, like a solid pick to take to a tournament and expect to top if you know play clean and don't hit a terrible bracket. So I was quite pleasantly surprised because when we discussed what if Sakazuki got unbanned, I don't remember if we did it on a podcast again or just like talks between us. I did not expect the deck to like contest without Mori, Ice Age, and Eruption, but turns out Wuchi with 4 life but blue is still good because you get access to all the broken blue cards. So quite pleased with how it works.
I'm pleasantly surprised given how excited everyone is for the deck. My inclinations going into if ever Sakazuki ever got unbanned, I thought the deck would just be a worse Lucci for the most part. Just because I thought that one, Jack is like a really important part of Black's like defensive options nowadays, or like controlling options nowadays. And I was worried having a 4 life leader trying to play Jack, you would just like get steamrolled a lot against aggro decks. But the earlier tools from Sakazuki are still pretty solid. Not having Great Eruption and Ice Age does hurt a little bit, but relying a little bit less on like the super core Navy package and relying a lot more on like the natural good like blue and black cards to deal with early curve has been super nice. I've been really impressed with Jozu in the deck as well. Like the first couple games I was ended up playing. Have there been any other cards? I'm not sure if either of you guys have tested this, but have there been any other cards that have been printed since like Sakazuki's printing that, or Sakazuki's banning, that have been like relatively impressive during initial testing?
Well, at least for me, I haven't been able to test it, so I'm sure that Hrvoje is going to give us a much better look at this. But the one card that stood out to me at the start of OP12, and I was thinking before we had any of this, even rumors of Sakazuki coming back, was Buhubastel, which I don't know if that's how you pronounce it in English, but it's a 3-cost event that can either bounce back a 4-cost to the or to the owner's hand, I believe, or if you have 6 cards less in your hand, draw 2 cards. Historically, Guanrong Quick, the Pirate King of 2023, ran, or was it, yeah, the 2023 season, ran 4 Sanji's Pilaf in his deck and managed to become the Pirate King that year. So this card, in a way, seems like a strict upgrade to that card, but I wonder if we're kind of past the time of being able to sort of use your extra dong to just draw 2 cards.
Sure, there's a competition for that spot as well because there's also the Vivi, which is less flexible, but she has a counter, so it's like less risky to include in the deck. But I didn't test that many variants. Like I tested the Jozo, like it immediately went into my deck because it's the card that I already tried it a lot in like various Usopp builds in OP10. Like Tsuru Jozo is just such a strong play, and Sakazuki, at least how I initially built it, has a lot of small units you drop to the board as you play. I'm not sure if, once again, if that will be optimal. But the other card I kind of want to make work better is probably the 1-cost Sengoku, because a lot of the power cards in the deck are not searchable anymore. And there's still a lot of Black Navy you want to run, but there was a problem I noticed with the 1-cost Ashigi. She doesn't really have targets you actually really want to find with her. Like some games, I would be missing a Hina and I would be like, Tashigi, find Hina. I was like, I'm glad Tashigi's here. But most games, she didn't really actually have an impactful search to make. So I was just thinking she's like not even Black Navy for the Sengoku if I choose to run him. And Sengoku does actually filter for those unsearchables, for the Brooks, for the Rebekahs, for the Uchi, for the 7-cost Jack, for the Jozu. Like pretty much all the cards that like, you know, create impact, they are not Navy in the deck. So either you move away from the searches completely and just basically what Uchi has done in OP10, OP11, you just play like all the good mid-game and late-game cards and you pretend early in doesn't exist, or you move in the more Black Navy direction just to make the finding those unsearchable pieces more consistent. So a few cards I wanted to test, but I haven't gotten around to yet. Probably the most notable one is the 1-cost Ripper, which is like the Navy blocker if you have another Black Navy card on the board. It's a cheap way to protect your board against, notably your Kuzan, against Green Zoro and other decks which try to kill stuff by battle, and obviously protects you from aggression, but also like other techs for Zoro besides Black Vortex, such as Slave Arrow, potentially, because you can also like block with Rebecca, bounce Rebecca, or generally work it into protecting any of your characters that would be taken out and get like the same benefit as, even better benefit than Black Vortex would. because you stop the Zoro leader swing. So yeah, I haven't tried out all the options. It's only been 1 day since the ban list, but also there's the discussion of 7-cost Jack versus 7-cost Blackbeard, which I think will largely depend on whether Sakazuki becomes a prevalent force in the meta, because Jack is really good for the mirror, but worse against everything not green, and I guess yellow in the meta, because yellow can like Katakuri bounce it to life if it's a control deck, whereas green can lock it like Luna, Carrot, and so on. But yeah, those were the main things on my mind, but I don't have enough time yet.
Yeah, of course.
Of course, yeah. I mean, with things like, for me at least, my perception was that the Green Zoro matchup would be difficult, which is why I was kind of rating Sakazuki poorly. The fact that you say that that's not necessarily true makes me a lot more optimistic about the deck. But thinking about these sorts of cards that especially Green likes to play, these very powerful 5-costs like Cavendish, like the 5-cost Tashigi, would you think that maybe the 7-cost Borsellino could maybe fit back into the deck, which with your leader effect could bottom a 5-cost?
So the problem with that is they still have like those small units that they use for protection, like Tashigi and Kyoshiro. And to be fair, they suck at protecting Tashigi because Kyoshiro only protects against KOs and Tashigi doesn't protect Tashigi. So Borsellino can actually get rid of her through either means of protection. But when they stick a Cavendish and then they're threatening to do like Mihawk into Tashigi, that's where things get really difficult because there's this larger number of bigger bodies on the board. And if you don't already have some setup to answer it, like Kuzan, Tukos, Tuta, Laboon, whatever you may run, you will encounter a problem in answering the board because you need to out the protection first and then the body. And that's where I think the biggest problems arise. And then 7-cost Borsellino, in my mind at least, appeared to be clunky. So I haven't tried it yet. That's the key point. I haven't tried it yet, so I might be speaking just out of like past biases.
Yeah,
But
at least one benefit for me, at least for the Borsellino, was that Kolshiro only protected your characters from being KO'd, and because it bottoms them, then maybe you could get through some other protection. It doesn't really help you with Tashigi, but so I can see those sorts of continuous repeatable effects from Jack or Teach being a bit better. But yeah, maybe something to consider. Just especially because it's a Navy card, it is one of those cards you may be looking for when you dig through your deck through things like the brand new, which you would probably tend to run.
This is another similar card, but does a card like 6-cost Boa feel like a similar card in terms of being a little bit too clunky, or does it kind of help slow the game down and interact with like obnoxious 1-cost and 2-cost a little enough to make the deck or make the card reasonable in the deck?
I haven't tried it yet. I've played Jozu in the deck, and it felt a more natural fit in the 6-cost slot. Boa, I've thought about like ever since like before, like when we were in Japan the first time, and the ban list was announced after Worlds, right? But then I didn't expect it to go into effect immediately. So I thought maybe if I can borrow Sakazuki for locals there, well, I would obviously run like Boa. Like I would run the Sengoku Searcher to find Moria, and she's like 7 Warlords target and so on. But in recent times, I'm not sure. Like if you can fully resolve the Boa effect, then it's like insane. Like bottom I don't know, 4-cost, 5-cost, whatever. Especially if you have Kuzan on board, even a 6-cost, and then you lock something up. But if you're just locking something up, I don't feel like that's necessarily a good trade because your opponent keeps the board to attack you with. She might be good, mainly because the main appeal of like bodies like Borsellino, Jozo, and Boa is you need something to actually close the game to present a threat on the board, because removal only works if you're also building your board while you remove. And if Boa fits into that puzzle, she becomes an amazing card because she's 6-cost 8k. But I'm not sure she does it better than Jozo, who has a counter and deals with a wide range of bodies, like guaranteed.
I think that's reasonable. I will say, just one thing that I can input as someone who has been playing on the Japanese side is that because Japan is a couple of months ahead, we do tend to have these weird metas like OP08 with Red Purple Law enabled, which you guys never had. Another thing that we had that you guys didn't have was OP07 with Sakazuki enabled, and this was just a very brief, like 2-week period. And in that time, some people, though not very many people, were actually running the 6-cost Hancock in Sakazuki, and also running the Sengoku Searcher for Warlords, because of course 8-cost Moria is a Warlord, which was really fun at the time, but they got rid of Sakazuki very quickly. So without Moria, I don't really see a justification for running the Searcher at the very least, but Hancock was running that build, and being able to bottom 1-cost with your lead effect 2 and with something like the 4-cost Kazung 6-cost is definitely something to consider for sure.
Those were also times of great eruption in Sakazuki. Good times.
Great times.
Like if you can enable Boa's reach in early game, then she becomes just insane. But I guess the only tools for that now would be either the Navy stage or like having a 2-cost tuta placed. Might be a good enough piece of synergy, because then if you bought on 4-cost, it's already like really good. But I feel like a lot of decks these days focus on the 5-cost units. It's only really Rayleigh that sticks in that low range because of his deck building restriction, but he makes up for it in quantity, I think, very nicely.
Yeah, and it's kind of difficult to justify Hancock, I guess, when you see something like Joza, which naturally just bounces 6 costs. If you combine that with any sort of reduction, you could just easily get rid of the opponents. For example, if you're fighting Lucci, just get rid of their 10 cost Kuzang with very minimal cost reduction. So it's just much easier to access the board. It's a very good anti-aggro and anti-control deck if you can get that cost reduction in. The one thing I guess that's a bit of a downside for Joza though is that you do need to have a character on the board. So potentially in mirrors where you're just hound blazing things for fun, or Murakumo and accidentally get rid of another extra thing, you may not always have those bodies on the board, but potentially with all of the new cards that we have in the game, especially things like the 1-cost Sengoku, you may not actually have that issue.
And it might just be a benefit, just because a lot of the early game in this deck, now you don't have Great Eruption nor Ice Age, you just have to do some relatively inefficient clears, like a lot of Suru Hound Blaze, a lot of Suru Lucci, just to clear some bodies on curve. And having a way to kind of get that card back seems like very, very important. Having the 6/7 is, first of all, get rid of their guy, which is super nice, but also make sure you aren't running out of cards, which without Great Eruption seems like it's going to happen a little more often than we'd like.
Yeah, like the main appeal for me is just going to be the reach, because for example against like mono purple Luffy, it would be a problematic curve, but you can answer their perfect curve with yours. Like if they go first and they go 1-4-7, like the Zorojuro into Luffy-Taro into Sangoro, you still have the option of like on 4 you swing leader, reduce Zorojuro, play Tsuru, brook the Zorojuro, and then next turn you swing leader, reduce Luffy-Taro to 6, and then Jozo bounces it. And those are the types of plays you can use to like slow the opponent down to the point where those matchups that still spam bodies still feel more manageable, and you get some setup along the way as well. But as I said, like these pieces are all unsearchable, which is why I think there might be more, why the black navy direction might be better than trying to fit into Shigi's. But once again, I don't want to make any like what's the word for it, definite statements, because I'm not sure myself. There's still a lot of stuff to test and too many options.
I think at the end of the day, if this episode can kind of just help people get like a starting point, an idea of what they maybe want to try in this meta, I think that would be great. But it's really nice that we have officially one of the best Sakazuki players to ever do it right here to talk about it with us. Actually, now that we think about it, great that we have a potential comeback of Sakazuki and NL with both of you guys here. Great how that worked out. I think at the time I was playing Green Bonney, which feels like years ago at this point.
Oh yeah, Japan had 7 with Saka. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but then now that I think about it, like Lucci also came out in OP07. I remember that like people were saying that Sakazuki is just a strict upgrade to Lucci. But like, oh my god, we had Sakazuki with Great Eruption, Tempest Kick, and Ice Age. Like, that's crazy, wasn't it?
I didn't even consider the fact that you had Ice Age or like Tempest Kick and Great Eruption together. That's insane.
Yeah, I remember early Lucci lists running both and thinking like, oh yeah, you can do that. But yeah, I didn't even occur to me that Sakazuki was probably doing that too. Feels like such a long time ago.
Yeah, I mean the main difference that comes between Sakazuki and Lucci is, sure, you have 1S life, but you have access to such powerful blue removal, and main thing, when you draw all those known counters in your deck, you just filter and like eventually find you're not gonna randomly die with a hand of known counters in Sakazuki. Like it can happen, but at a much lower rate than it would in Lucci. So it just feels so smooth and so nice to play in comparison.
Yeah, one of the big things for the direct comparison between Sakazuki and Lucci is that Lucci, the cards go directly to your trash, whereas for Sakazuki, they go through your hand once. So you very rarely actually miss out on a card, whereas for Lucci, sometimes you leader effect and just drop 2 Morias into the trash and you just want to end yourself. But for Sakazuki, you don't really have those issues. You don't really have the issues of breaking too much. So the deck just feels a lot better to play as a whole. I was just skeptical about the 4-life aspect, but I'm happy that we have this thing to consider now that we have opened up the door to a bunch of new control decks in the meta.
Yeah, the stakes are probably the highest for Yonas as his finals. As jealous as I am, they fall into this OP12 format with the starter deck 20. I'm forgetting the blue one. I'm forgetting the number.
ST22, yeah.
Because that is potentially a ticket to Worlds. I don't know if it's top 2 or top 3 for NA in the first wave. I think the only thing we have is like a couple of OP12 tournaments, and interestingly enough, one of them is exactly on the day the ban list goes into effect. So regional Bologna, which I will be in attendance for, will have Sakazuki legal and all the bans in place. So that will be an interesting one to watch out for.
Yeah. I'm very excited, but also terrified with the amount of potential options we have with the new changes, especially with Sakazuki in the format. There's just going to be a lot of different competing factors, and this gives me a lot of like both nostalgia and also like I forget the opposite of nostalgia, but negative. But I'm also kind of worried because it seems so similar to like OP05 format where nationals happened, where we basically only had like one tournament before nationals, and that's all the data we had for the meta. So there's going to be a lot of differing amounts of information, differing amounts of just like people teching for different things, and it's going to be very hard to metagame into such a wide meta. So I'm excited for it, but I'm hoping to be the person with the right answer.
We are as well. That you're the person, I mean.
Yeah, actually, this is something maybe like one step over from the topic that we were talking about. But do you guys generally prefer when the meta is very messy, where you're trying to find the answer, or do you prefer when there's like one solid big bad deck like Blue Purple Luffy that you just need to figure out how the meta is going to revolve around that specifically?
I'm the kind of person that really does a lot better in open formats, mostly just because I think one of my best skill sets in this card game is just being able to adapt on the fly and put people in relatively novel situations where they just don't really know the default answer. And once kind of formats kind of get solved, people know what the best one or two decks are. People will be a lot more familiar with a bunch of weird like board states interactions, like decision making in uncomfortable spots. And that's kind of where that's like my one trick for a lot of the time is just like I hope my opponent doesn't know how to play this spot. I'm gonna make the game as unconventional as possible. And that's kind of where I gain a lot of equity. But I also understand and appreciate having a very solved metagame because it makes it a lot easier to be a rogue deck builder. That's also where I really enjoy playing card games. Is just becoming that or creating that anti-meta pick. And it's much harder to do in a very open format.
Yeah, I think Jonas's answer is more like on the timeline scale of how the format progresses, but I will give mine on like what type of format I prefer in terms of like in terms of count of the viable options, because I really heavily prefer decks when metas where there's only like one or two viable decks, in a sense that if you're not bringing one of those two decks, the odds that you're gonna lose to them, like when they're piloted by a good player, just because I'm kind of obsessed with prep for these tournaments, and when it's like a small number of decks, you can account for pretty much every relevant scenario and then just like make sure you win. I don't know how else to put it, but there's like these one or two challenging decks where you have to like always play like maximum focus and eke out small advantages, and then there's this bunch of like decks where you just you can let the autopilot take over, like there's zero mental fatigue, you just win because your deck is better. And I always did the best in formats like that, like in OP3 where it was like the red meta, in OP5 obviously, and later on with Black Yellow Luffy. So I definitely prefer those closed, and I wouldn't say solved formats, because smaller number of decks does not mean the decks are solved. There's always like room for innovation, specifically for the mirror matches and finding the ways to break the patterns in your favor. For me, those are like the most fun, because I don't have a problem preparing with like for a wider field, but the problem is with a wider field, I feel like you just physically cannot prepare for anything. There's only 50 slots in the deck, so no matter how much you test, you have to choose what to sacrifice, and then if you run into wrong stuff on the day, you're kind of doomed. And I've been on the wrong end of that, I feel, a bit too much this year, ever since BY got banned. So I definitely prefer like those tier 0 or like very high tier 1 metas.
I think I kind of tend to lean more towards the way that Jonas likes to play, but maybe not necessarily for the same reasons. I don't necessarily put my opponent into weird situations during the game. I try to put them in those situations ahead of time with weird deck building. That's kind of my obsession. So, at least I guess for you, Jonas, though, having this tournament early on in OP12 where things are unsolved may potentially be an advantage for you. Um, I guess kind of a follow-up question then, although it's been 1 day since the ban list, so we can't say definitively. Where do you think that this meta may end up going? What are the decks that you think may be the decks that people need to look out for going into OP12?
I think the one deck that no one will ever argue is not going to be tier 1, despite people's lack of interest in it, is Green Zoro. I think the deck is just going to be a very obnoxious part of the meta, where it's just going to be a powerful aggro deck, has a very strong curve, it's very efficient in like way too many ways, and it puts a very fast clock on the format in a lot of matchups where people just can't kind of do nothing the entire time. And I think a lot of people's focus on the meta is just trying to navigate around Green Zoro, and whether people want to play things within the Rayleigh space, where they're being a little bit more aggressive, or if they want to take a little bit more controlling aspects, where they want to go like Lucci, Sakazuki, yellow decks, stuff like that. My natural inclination is I think that at the end, Green Zoro is just going to be like probably the second best deck, and I think some sort of hard counter to Green Zoro that's relatively flexible is going to be like the deck that comes out on top. I'm not entirely sure if a deck that's like black, like Lucci, maybe even Teach that plays a bunch of black vortexes will be good enough in that meta. But that's kind of what I think would be like something that kind of does everything that I want to do in the upcoming meta, where it's just like I'm good against a bunch of aggro decks. I have some inevitability in control matchups, and I'm like okay against green. Is kind of where my ideal vision of a deck that I would want to bring to nationals would look like.
Expect a very wide field. Like Yonas said, I think there's like those safe picks where people already like tested them a lot, and they know their strength just from the Eastern results. So I think Zora and Rayleigh are undisputedly going to be in top 5. Actually, okay, maybe I need to like hold that statement on Rayleigh, depending on how black removal decks develop and Sakazuki does. But those are like the very comfortable, very they have a known power level decks that I think people will resort to rather easily. But then there's so many other decks to choose from. Like there's the slash decks, which I think Red Green Smoker is going to maintain a solid standing in the meta as well. He once again has access to Mulligan. I think Green Purple Luffy, as bad as the Rayleigh matchup is, it still does pretty well into pretty much everything else. But then there's Teach. Teach is like I think it checks like almost every random deck in the meta, but then struggles feels evenish into Rayleigh, struggles into Green Purple and probably Zora. But as like so many random picks, like just in the yellow color, like Enel, Kalgara, Yamato, Buyo, Nami, I'm probably forgetting like even Black Yellow Wolfie you can make a case for. And you can probably find 4 or 5 decks for each color in the game which might see a representation in the meta. So I think it will be a bit of a Wild West, but with the power concentrated mainly where you would expect it to be concentrated, which is like I guess Green Zora is the most approachable and like lowest barrier to entry in terms of skill for choice.
I think it'll very much come down to what is actually going to end up really settling as the sort of triangle, because we usually have a triangle for the meta. Maybe we're going to have to see like which control deck comes up to contend best against the like Rayleigh Green Zoro new aspect that we have to consider for OP12, and of course what decks like Black Teach, potentially Purple Luffy, for example, could even topple some of those control decks as well, and just make a big triangle and just see how you end up doing on the day and how you can deal with some of those slightly more difficult matchups. So though, I am very excited though, although I won't be playing OP12, I'm very excited to see what people end up cooking up, because Blue Purple Luffy not being part of the meta is just such a massive change.
Random aside, one deck that I've only theorized and it might be Coke, but I really want to try is actually just the Italian Luffy, the starter deck. I think it's 14 Luffy. I think that deck's weirdly might be good against both like Rayleigh and Green Zoro, just being an obnoxious 6k 5 life leader, and having both the new Garp, which haven't really had like a great opportunity to show up, and also the OP12 Koala works with Luffy leaders. Not Koala, Robin.
Hmm.
I think that's also like a pretty like natural inclusion in that deck, and I think that might be like relatively obnoxious for a lot of decks to work against. So I'm kind of excited to mess around with that. So that should be a fun experiment moving forward.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, there are a lot of OP12 cards like that Robin, which I think were just basically gated, especially Robin, um, just because it was more or less gated to bad decks, I would say. Black Yellow Koala never really found a footing in the meta because of Zoro. The Black Luffys, Purple Black Luffys tend to struggle because of either Green Zoro or Blue Purple Luffy. But hopefully, with some of those gone, now we're going to actually see some more interesting things. Like, I think also the 2-cost Shirahoshi in OP12 is also a great card that protects your board, 6 cost or less board, which could be a pretty solid anti-aggro option for decks like Karagara as well. I think lots of pretty interesting cards to experiment with that didn't really have the chance to be experimented with just because Blue Purple Luffy was so overwhelmingly powerful.
Reason Garb completely slipped my mind. I remember like when it was first revealed, I was like, "Oh, this is great for Star 14 Luffy." But yeah, he just nukes the 7 Ghost, right? Like
Yep.
you attach it onto leader, and yeah, I can definitely see an angle there, especially because if you really want to hand rip with that deck, like you know Isha and Robin, well, probably just Robin is much safer.
But
Yeah,
that's
that's
purely theoretical, but it seems really fun.
yeah, that type
I mean,
of like value trading black we haven't seen much outside of like the specific OP10 builds of Teach, but there might be something there. If not in ST14 Luffy, maybe there's something to be done with like the black, purple black Luffy, because he also gets the same benefit, right? If you run
Yeah,
like a
Purple
Navy
Black Luffy is a
engine,
little bit harder to use for a Navy engine, but yeah, it does do the same thing.
even with
actually
the
pretty
new
interesting.
searcher, like the one that basically era for
Oh, yeah, the
Navy.
Navy Officer Searcher event, and then brand new.
You can probably still fit in the beer Luffy and cruise through aggro somewhat, maybe. I'm not sure actually. I kind of want to test it now because there's I think some purple navy support. Like actually, is there? There's like purple X Drake from OP1, and is there anything else?
The only thing that came to my mind.
Okay, maybe I'm
Uh,
tripping.
yeah, I'll look into it. I'm not entirely sure about Purple Navy support, but Purple gets everything, so there's probably something good.
Yeah. At least, I guess, on the topic of, is it ST14 Luffy, the black one?
I believe so.
Okay. Yeah, well, Black Luffy. I feel like maybe in your meta, we never really had Black Luffy in our meta in Japan, but I have considered things because we had to consider Purple Black Luffy. The +1 cost on your characters hasn't necessarily been a huge factor aside from just getting your characters out of 9-mom range in OP11 and OP12. But if we do have a resurgence of black control decks, whether it is Lucci or Sakazuki, that +1 costs all of your characters, especially the 6-cost Robin, just innately being a 9-cost on the board if your leader is Luffy or Koala, does make it quite difficult to deal with for some of these control decks. So actually kind of interesting because I wasn't really thinking about the other decks that way of countering black decks.
Yeah, it also has the OG Hound Blaze in Top Knot, so heavily abusable in the cost reduction deck.
Well, speaking of Houndblaze, it's great that you could finally use the alt art Houndblaze, which they
Yeah,
printed
yeah.
much too late.
The deck looks so nice nowadays.
Yeah, I actually have your world's deck list like on my second monitor here, and I'm seeing like half the cards that weren't shiny in your world's list are now shiny. So
Brand new Hina, Hound Blaze. Maybe
good,
that's
we
it.
never
I
got
can't
that.
remember any other ones.
You ran Ice Age and
Ice Age,
Bartolomeo.
yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, Barto. The one
Maybe you run it for the Mensheri target still, potentially. It is something to consider. But even, I guess, jumping a little bit ahead in PRB02, you also have things like the 6-cost Subble, which is a very good Rebecca target, for example. So some other pretty solid cards that could potentially work with the deck because Sakazuki can fill up trash maybe a little bit slower than other decks, but still manages to fill up trash pretty consistently. So some cards like that to consider for sure.
I like how we consider one card a turn in your trash is a little too slow nowadays, but
No,
Dude, have
that's
you
also
seen
something I noticed.
Emu? Sorry.
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, Emu looks insane. But one thing I noticed while digging through like all the support that came out for Navy after Sakazuki got banned, I was like very underwhelmed. Like the new Forkos Kuzan, which is I don't remember if OP11 or OP12, but the sword stuff as well. It just didn't feel like at all impactful for Sakazuki, and I noticed how cautious Bandai was with any form of black support because I think black is now the only color that really has no good way to cheat out value in terms of bodies on the board. You can potentially remove stuff if you draw your pieces, and that's where you're supposed to get the value. But there's like no swarm plays to do something like I don't know, Luffitaro or the Forkos Luffy in Rayleigh or anything of the sort. You're just kind of forced to play the same game you played like 7-8 sets ago, but the fact that it's still potentially good enough just shows how broken Black was back in the day.
There are some cards that exist, like the 7-cost Sengoku, like the 8-cost Dragon, but there are very specific in what cards they're either allowed to bring back or the condition to actually be able to use the effect. So yeah, still one of those things that, they're very cautious to actually print a good 4-cost Navy card, probably because of this Sengoku. But the second that they do, anything that's like a 4-cost 5,000 on play minus X cost or something, then suddenly you could have a pretty solid deck with this 7-cost Sengoku. Also a Navy card, so would be one to look at for that style, I guess.
Yeah, I think the best piece of support Navy got specifically since then is like the EBO. I think it's EBO 2. It was where it had the Garp for Garp Leader, but that obviously does nothing for Sakazuki. But for Garp Leader, that card was crazy. Come in and KO at 3 cost at minimum if you didn't have any other ways to attach Dawn.
I play Garp so bad. I just don't think it'd be that good.
Yeah, the only time I thought it had a chance is EBO 2, where it did really well into Green Purple Luffy, like destroyed Green Purple Luffy even.
I missed out.
It technically gets some buffs because it's a red-black Navy leader, which means that it can use the 4-cost Colby from PRB2 a little bit better because it's a 6k on the opponent's turn. I don't necessarily know if that's exactly the card that Garp wants, but there is some Garp support here and there. I think that 5-cost Garp that Hrvoje just mentioned is the big one, though.
Yeah, I also got a Searcher. Like, there's so many more Searchers in the game these days. Like, I noticed when looking at the builds, like every deck, if they want to, they can run so many Searchers, like no matter what. And I feel it's most accentuated in green with like the Perona, where the slash search is so powerful, or like the variety of reach you have with it compared to just like the specific pirate crew, and also the flexibility of adding events. Wow. Like they made monsters out of decks in terms of consistency compared to like the days before. And Rayleigh obviously runs 20 searchers. Like, come on.
I wish I could play Perona in a bunch of other green decks, but the slash stuff sometimes it's just like, I can't play Perona in my Bonney deck, even though I really want to try it, or like the Hiyori. That's literally locked to only Zoro, but yeah, they're really fun deck building decision or deck building like restrictions. Just because I think that when you look at Perona searchers and you look at like cards like OP1 through 5, you're like, oh, this card's slash. I'm super excited to kind of play this card. That's kind of how I felt about Arlong. Like, oh, Arlong slash. Let's think about this for a second.
I feel like I heard something about the leader Arlong, but it might have just been that I heard that it does really well into Blue Purple Luffy, which is no longer a factor to consider anymore.
Yeah, he got like pieces of support here and there, like the 7-cost Arlong, the double attack buggy. I think there was something else, but oh yeah, the OP13 also has the, is it S-Snake? I think it was S-Snake that was like pretty good for Arlong.
Oh,
I don't even remember the deck, but I remember thinking, oh, this is made for Arlong. It's just like that type of deck that might surprise you at an event because it's not terrible. Like it has potential, and it might just steal a match or two from an important run, but that's enough. So you kind of have to know what their cards do as well, which is once again why I'm not the biggest fan of like a metas that are this wide open. Like, I don't know, it's so difficult to prepare.
I certainly think that it's kind of two sides of the same coin, where you have the chance of hitting into one of these, as we would call in Japan, landmine decks that are intentionally there to just ruin you when you're there at like 1-0 or something, and then lose the next 3 matches after they beat you. But it can also happen to other people. And if you're in this meta where no one knows what they're doing, then your chances of winning are equal to everyone else's chances of winning. And so it's the small extra amounts of knowledge that you have as a player, the small extra amount of testing or deck building that you were able to do to refine your deck a little bit more than everyone else, makes it so that you can, on average, end up winning more than other people, but it's very difficult to actually make that flourish when you only have one tournament to prove it. So honestly, I understand the argument for both, but I enjoy chaos.
I mean, fair. And most people disagree with me. I know people don't like tier 0 formats. I don't blame them, but
I definitely think
it's
that
personal preference at the end of the day.
If you're a top level player, I feel like it's understandable to prefer tier 0 formats because it's much easier to prepare for them and consistently win over multiple tournaments. I do think that if you're a lower level player, then it's much easier to accidentally stumble into top slots in a sort of chaos format. So for the general public, I feel like open formats are a little bit more fun, a little bit more easier to deal with from a gameplay perspective. But if you are trying to win a tournament, then knowing what you're going to fight against is going to be a lot easier to do so.
Probably harsh description on some points there, but and it is that type of sentiment, yeah. So what are your bets for the best deck in the format after the ban list? It's only been 24 hours or like 26 hours something. What are we thinking? One deck, just so we can look back at it in like a month and laugh.
I'll think of one cope deck that I want to win.
And I guess we can use when it happens the NA finals bench as a benchmark for because it's going to be the biggest event with the highest level of play because it's qualification only.
I'm gonna guess Teach. That's gonna be my safe pick.
To me, that wouldn't have been a safe pick.
The safe pick.
Yeah, I think that like Rayleigh and Green Zoro are going to be the safe picks. I'm always just a yellow control believer. I think that yellow kid's going to have a very powerful showing in the meta. As much as I love blue yellow Nami, I think kid just has very clear strengths and weaknesses designed for him that are much easier to play around.
Yeah, I'm a coward. My heart wants to say Sakazuki, but now that Rayleigh is seen as a potential underdog in the meta, I'm thinking Mulgan all the way. Like, show it to him, Rayleigh.
I think Rayleigh's great. Honestly, this is a weird phenomenon in Japan, actually. Maybe we can kind of transition this into a little bit of OP13 discussion, but we'll probably do that a little bit more in the next episode. I'm convinced that in OP12 in Japan, Rayleigh was by far the second best deck, but its play rate never reflected that. It was always like blue purple Luffy, then green Zoro, then green purple Luffy, and then you were likely to see red Rayleigh somewhere between like 4th, 5th, 6th ish. But in terms of actual win rate, Green Zoro tended to struggle a lot to make it to top cut. Green Purple Luffy also tend to struggle, though we have had some buffs in PRB02 that has mended that. And Red Rayleigh, despite a relatively low play rate, did manage to win 2 championships in Japan. I think the deck's great. I think that even if it loses Blue Purple Luffy as one of the matchups, that it was okay to deal with, and potentially maybe gains some scary matchups like Yellow NL. I think that just the pure deck power, that the pure power that the deck has is just enough for it to be able to deal with so much in the meta, and that's really what you're looking for in an open meta.
I think the biggest boon for Rayleigh after the ban list is it was an evenish matchup, it felt, blue-purple against Rayleigh, but I think what it loses with the matchup with UP gone or nerfed is not a 50-50 matchup, it loses a matchup where it doesn't have control. Because it never really felt like it was Rayleigh's hand that mattered to like drive the outcome of the game. It was always whether blue purple Luffy like hit those answers he likes to see, like God Thread, Gravity Blade, and finding Lin-Lins, which is something as a Rayleigh player you have like no agency over. So I feel like it lost the matchup it had the least amount of control over, and it potentially gained another one in Sakazuki, but you know that's something time will tell whether it actually is as impactful as blue purple Luffy was, because Sakazuki has no healing. If you can get into a position where you're on 1 life and you go unblockable 15 in 2 turns, that could just be enough. So I feel like it just, as a deck itself, it got like way more control over its own destiny over a large tournament. And that's something I really value.
I think that's definitely going to be one of the ways that people would approach a difference in deck building for Rayleigh now with OP12 without Luffy. I think a lot of people were running things like Kid Killer to just get that one extra 7k hit here and there. But now that you don't necessarily need that, you could potentially play less rushers, but I also feel like with the aspect of black control potentially being in the meta, you may even want to run more rush characters. Things like the 3-cost Jinbei, the 3-cost Zoro, even the 2-cost Sanji from SC01 could potentially come into the list just to get that little bit of extra damage into these control decks. So you really don't want to let them get to their 9 Yamatos, their Rebecca Hinaluchis, all of these strong cards that come online in the late game.
Yeah, I am not entirely sure where I want to take Rayleigh deck building moving forward, but yeah, I do think that you have a little bit more options because you don't have to deal with a 6k leader as much. The card Observation Hockey that used to be like a 3 or even 4 of an Alala list seems like a little bit less interesting, even though it's a very powerful searcher event, and I think it's a very busted card in the deck. You might just not need as many. You can go down to like 2 if you'd like, just because you don't really need to swing 6 with your leader that much moving forward, and you'd much rather just play more like characters on the board.
Or just about these. I saw some resurgence in those as well. Like the Japan finals win in round 1, but I also saw it's running 2 or 3 even, just to get like 2 the best card in your deck as consistently as possible, because it allows you also to another way to bridge from Buggy to the 4-cost Luffy.
I am a big fan of the card. It does need to pick up character cards, which sometimes made it a bit awkward when you just wanted to cycle into another event. But it is just being able to check 5 and stuff and just make your game plan as consistent as possible was pretty good. This is actually a pretty interesting topic, but if we start going into be a very long topic of what cards do we not need now that Blue Purple Luffy isn't around. Um, but yeah, Red Rayleigh definitely seems like it would be quite a different beast now that he doesn't have to consider Blue Purple Luffy as much. Green Zoro potentially doesn't run Hody, I would imagine. Um, and the other decks, it feels a bit too speculative to really start to consider it. Maybe we don't see that much, is it Luffy Tuttle from like Green Purple Luffy, for example. But yeah.
I would need to think about the exact answer I'd want to give in terms of like what cards you don't need as much. I think it's going to be answer a question I'm going to be asking myself a lot over the next couple of weeks for sure.
Next month even. Is it like 22nd or something like that?
I think
For
it's
the
the
finals?
20th exactly.
Oh, 20th.
Yeah, the 20th. So
Oh yeah,
we
that
have,
makes sense. Yeah. We
yeah,
have regionals on 27th, so 7 days before that.
you have exactly 1 month to solve every format, or at least this one. So should
That'll
be a
be a
fun
lot of
time.
fun. Wait, sorry, what was your pick for your surprise deck for OP12? Oh, Teach.
My deck was
Right.
Teach, yeah, for the deck that would come up the top. I think that
Mm-mm.
it struggles a little bit into like Zoro, which is like the main concern. But having a searchable Black Vortex is definitely very helpful. And I think that Teach is going to be the deck that's kind of stops every other deck from performing relatively well, which is one of the main reasons why anyone would play the deck.
So if Nats was tomorrow, would you bring Teach then?
If it was tomorrow, probably not. If I had to go tomorrow with like only like 12 or 24 hours of testing, I probably would just play Green Zoro.
Mm.
But Rayleigh is like the other deck that I would probably choose. But I also think that mechanically you have to be very comfortable with Rayleigh, and despite the fact that it just feels like it's just swing five a bunch over and over again, there are a lot of like small decisions that are really important in the early game.
Yeah.
Well, if it was tomorrow, or if you were in my shoes tomorrow, what would you guys bring? If that was hypothetically tomorrow, would you just bring
I
Rayleigh?
I
I
think it
would
would be
not.
really.
I suck at aggro decks. I would probably bring I'd probably bring Blue Yellow Nami, but you oh no, you guys don't have the same cards as I do. Yeah, no.
But he's gonna have it for Nats, so like
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we don't have
no,
Shoujo though. I think the
yeah,
young
there's
girl's
no
so good.
PRB2, there's no Shoujo.
exactly. That's the main thing is that I think Shoujo is just so good for that deck. So that actually does reduce my opinion of Nami a lot. If I were to go tomorrow, I'd probably just emergency put together some kind of yellow control deck, maybe Anil, maybe Yellow Kid.
I'd have to bet it on Rayleigh, just because I haven't figured out how to consistently beat Rayleigh with green purple, besides hope they open slow and I kill them faster. And
Yeah,
Sakazuki, I obviously not nowhere near as comfortable with yet, so it would have to be Rayleigh. Just look at him. I've tested the deck enough, and I love how it plays.
And I guess a little bit of a brief segment, as we haven't even officially on the podcast talked about Ema, the final leader of OP13. What do you guys feel about the bans in OP13? We have the new three brothers leaders. We have Ema and Roger. Honestly, oh, we also have Yellow Bonney. Honestly, most, if not all of these decks are very solid and could potentially be decent in the meta. I think that Blue Purple Luffy not being part of the meta is significant. Us not having to worry about Blue Nami is nice. Personally, just putting my opinion out there first, I don't think that Sakazuki would be nearly as good in OP13 as it would potentially be in OP12, just due to the fact that Emo exists now.
Yeah, being unable to remove stuff sucks.
yeah. I would go as far to say I just don't think Sakazuki's playable in OP13. I think it's just a different game. Emu just seems like it's going. I'm super excited for Emu. I just don't think that traditional black control decks is going to be that good at, or even like reasonable in a format where I think that Sabo and Emu are going to be the best decks.
Are we all on the Subble train?
Are you? Nice. Choo choo. I'm what's the conductor called?
Yeah.
I
mean,
I
way
think
it
it's the
wins this
engineer in
one.
trains. The one that
Yeah.
drives is the engineer.
At least from I haven't tested all of the decks. I still need to test 2 more of the OP13 new decks. But in terms of the power between all of them, so far it feels like Ema, then Subble, then Ace, and I haven't been able to test Luffy or Bonney, but Roger would come fourth to those. But all of them are pretty solid, and definitely think that I was building my deck wrong for some of them as well. Sakazuki, most likely not in the meta, unfortunately. But Blue Purple Luffy not being in the meta is relatively significant because that matchup wasn't necessarily super easy for Ema. So Ema's maybe better situated than he was 1 week ago, or they were 1 week ago, since we're not sure. Otherwise, it seems very speculative, but I am very excited for OP13. So we get that in actually 2 days in Japan.
Kind of crazy how much of a power up the entire set is, like for every color it got. I'm not sure like how many of the previous decks are even going to remain relevant, like from the current top of the meta. I would expect Zoro to not be that easy to get rid of, and I'm not sure about Rayleigh. Like so many 6K leaders, so many blockers, so many ways to answer multiple bodies for cheap, and green purple Luffy, kind of a similar boat. Like Emu can clear base costs, and that is dirty. That is potentially just if you keep the board down enough for long, then your blockers just carry you in the late game when you play the domain expansion. Sabo, also, I'm not happy with how simplistic the game patterns turn out to be with the Revolutionary Army engine, but it does seem to be the strongest variant because of the. I mean, HQ in a black deck is like the ideal stage. It's only Teach had access to one before this that was actually good. And yeah, it's just like that Sabo is massive value. It's 8 cost, 8k blocker, effectively, just a menace. So yeah, my only question is like really how relevant is Bonney gonna be as like probably the strongest on curve aggro deck where she just hits you and hits you and hits you and kills you very fast.
Yeah, I have yet to test Bonney, but I do have a theory that Vegapunk could potentially be the better aggro deck. We'll see.
Oh yeah, he got the vanilla.
Yeah, I think just honestly, he uses the 7 cost Stussy and the 9 cost or 9 cost Bonney just very, very well with his leader effect. So could potentially be one of those decks and could potentially be fast enough to be able to topple over decks like Ime, maybe even Subble, because although Subble has 5 life, he doesn't necessarily have ways to gain resources. So I think OP13 maybe a little bit more flexible than it seems on the surface, where Ime seems like it just beats everything, although I don't necessarily think that's untrue. But yeah, I'm a bit more envious of your format in terms of a deck building standpoint, but I'm happy to be in OP13 just because I also have some new tools to try.
To me, okay, this is a complaint specific to OP13, but it has been like an issue in previous sets as well. I don't like when Bandai like makes a new leader and then the cards for that leader in the set effectively form a starter deck where you just, here's the recipe, we built everything for you, just put the cards in. Because Emu, Roger, and to a degree red green Luffy all feel that way, where you kind of are just going to play the cards they gave you specifically for this leader. And and not much else. I think green Luffy's the green film cards are the only ones that could see playing like the other existing leaders, and maybe Roger engine leaks over, as you said, to the blue purple Luffy. But I don't like when they just do these deck building recipes in the booster pack itself. Like it takes a lot of the creativity of deck building away, I feel.
Especially for Emo, it feels like there's 48 cards that are already set. So, yeah, I feel like it would have been nice if we had a little bit more space.
Like I was very like amused by the Nefertari Cobra in your first team movie, though, I think, and then the next day just show
Yeah.
like the same card but Celestial Dragon. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
why even bother innovating? And they're just gonna print like the full package immediately.
Yeah, and I felt so
Yeah,
happy about that Cobra because I actually thought of it because there was a Japanese live stream where you were on there with me, and the Lucci player not necessarily won the game because of Cobra, but it was a very big issue throughout the game, just having a small
Yeah.
blocker in the early game. And the
Against
second
Green
that I
Zoro.
saw you, yeah, like I thought, oh, this is a perfect card, and apparently Bund, I thought so too because they printed
Yeah,
it
but
just
he also
Celestial
had like
Dragon.
the most insane curve, and like Cobra on 2, Kuz on 4, and then double Brook on 6 or something like that. I think it was the
Jeez,
case,
okay.
and he just destroyed the Zoro. Because Zoro had like Cavendish plus the Kyoshiro, and then leader swing, play Brook KO Kyoshiro, Kuz on swing, Brook KO Cavendish, and GG's like left him in the dust.
One random thing, I really want to play Vegapunk. Weirdly enough, I think one of the best cards that got was the vanilla Shaka.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's just insane.
Yeah, 5/7 vanillas is where it's at. Like it needed a character to play on the first turn that wasn't Atlas, it felt like, and I think that Shaka is another busted scientist to put in play very early.
Yeah, and that's the thing is that he's a scientist, which means that you could also play him off of the 5 cost Vegapunk as well. Just having more targets for that is very nice. Make sure you just never miss that, and just having the defensive aspect of Vegapunk and the offensive aspect of Shaka. I think he got like at least 3, maybe 4 if you consider the Searcher, but I do think that there's maybe some better options, not necessarily sure yet. Just like almost perfect cards for the deck that if the deck isn't at least playable, I'd be shocked.
Yeah, I agree. Like the vanilla is just insane. Vegapunk was like any deck that can cheat out units of 5 cost or more. Like the vanilla is just the strongest thing you can put on the board if you can put it out early enough. Because I always said that for Lim. If Lim got an Odyssey vanilla that is 5 cost, like the deck's power level, especially in OP10 when Lim was more relevant, would be insane. But oh yeah, Lim might be one of the winners of the ban list as well, because Blue Purple Luffy was her like near unwinnable matchup, and now it's gone. It potentially replaced by Green Zoro, but Green Zoro might have solutions like Defensive Ends, Judgment of Hell, all the purple stuff. So we'll see. But just another deck to add to the list of like I think at this point over 20 decks that might be relevant and have some representation in the tournament, like 1% ish.
Yeah, no, honestly, even in OP13, I was thinking about Lim just because she seems like one of the leaders that could potentially do well into EMA, just being able to spread out your board very, very quickly and hit multiple times throughout the game. But just one of those things we have to see. We did also get a bit of a ruling clarification on the 10 cost Shanks, the green one, which we were talking about. We weren't some sure. Yeah. So 2 things. One, you can't use events, which is one thing we weren't sure about. And another thing that we didn't really consider, but is actually possible, is that you can actually play characters if they come off of effects and are not just physically played out of your hand. So therefore, you can use Lim's leader effect to play out a character after you play the 10 cost Shanks. You can use like any sort of character that would play another character onto the board.
STO3 Sentomaru.
If you have the means to, you can. So there are some things like that to consider that make Shanks a little bit better, but I don't necessarily think that Lim is the sort of deck that would want to run 10 cost Shanks, nor would any deck besides potentially Red Green Luffy want to.
I think she benefits the most from effectively getting a 5 cost vanilla in the green Sanji in OP13. Yeah, he refunds the he's effectively 3 cost 7k, which is how he would play out if you just played him off of leader ability. So, and he's a straw hat, so if you like tech in like the Nico Robin with the KO protection, he falls under the protection umbrella. So Link can definitely be annoying for a lot of these decks. Also, is your battery on flashing red? Does that mean your camera is nearly dying?
It is going to die soon. But one more point before I change out my batteries is that while we're on the topic of those green film cards, your curve going second is so much better now as Lim, because on 6 you can play the 5 cost Sanji, get 2 dong back, you have 3 dong now, and then you could leader effect and put out 2 5 costs for 6. Decks like Lim, decks like Zoro Sanji that like to play efficient 5 costs are just a lot stronger thanks to these cards like this. Definitely something to try.
Does the Sanji not have a restriction on the what you can play after?
No.
I think the Sanji now.
Yeah, I should try Lim. I go straight from Ima to Lim.
They never knew the deck existed, so
yeah,
you can just surprise everyone.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Hold on, let me just change my battery for 1 second.
First have locals and then testing. Yeah.
Hell yeah.
But I run the locals, so I kind of have to be there.
Makes sense.
Present. And I also have a nice book to read between rounds. I'm like
there we go.
75% through the blade itself by Abercrombie.
You'll probably finish it.
We're getting book recommendations during the All Blue as well. That's great. I wish I had a book to recommend. Any last thoughts? Any sorts of things that you want to leave in people's minds at the very end for people who have managed to stay all the way until the end?
You people who watch until the end or listen till the end are beautiful people. We love you.
10 out of 10.
Out of 10. Let's, I think, wrap it up there then. Thank you, beautiful people, for listening to the 8th episode of The All Blue, whether it was on Spotify or YouTube. Hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to let us know what you guys want to see next time.
In the comments.
In the comments below, or maybe on Twitter. Anywhere is fine. Thank you guys for watching or listening. We'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.